anything else? Any more flowery introductions here? Thank you so much, and what a delight it is to be the icing on a very fattening cake, brain fattening, that is, from all day. It's just been amazing, and in addition to this wonderfully erudite title, and enlightening as well, of this all-day session, I would like to add Old Home Week, because it seems like just about everybody here is so happy to see everybody else here. And I'm particularly happy to be here with two people with whom I have traveled the world. I think our last trip was in, well, it was around the continent of Africa, but we ended up at the funeral of President Nyerere, that's right, which was a historic end to a very historic time. And the last time we were together was in the most moving time I think you've had up to that date. It was in Darfur, when even you were a little bit weepy as you talked to the non-governmental organization people who were doing heroic work in that very difficult country. I don't think I always see him giggling and laughing. And this was the first time I had seen him close to tears, and it was an amazing emotional moment based on what we had seen, and I hope we can talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But I'd like to start today on a positive note by asking you, Secretary Albright, since your name starts with A, not because you're not because of age before beauty.
It's very rare.
No, it's the A in Albright. Stop now. Him and the Dalai Lama, I can't tell you, they just tickle me to death. Listen, but tell me seriously, what has been the most significant human rights development you've witnessed in your wonderful time in the world?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here with you, Charlene, and with the Archbishop, who is a dear friend, and to celebrate the 75th anniversary of this amazing foundation. For me, the biggest thing that's happened is actually the recognition of human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the basis that it creates for everything that we have done in my generation in many ways, of looking at how we have recognized the fact that we are all the same and we are all due that kind of respect. What was interesting for me is in terms of being a professor, but then also participating in the Carter administration, is then to see how human rights, in fact, became central to American foreign policy. And I think President Carter, you've had on some videos, but I think one can't really overestimate what that did. I was in the Carter administration when people thought that it was appropriate for the United States to be concerned about human rights in other countries. And it then, in many ways, was strengthened and partnered with human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, a number of organizations that then were able to pick up that work. And now it is just very much central in terms of what people talk about. We talk about what are human rights in China, what they are in Zimbabwe, what are the human rights that link us all. So for me, it's just having it be so central to what we talk about and think is appropriate for countries to talk about vis-a-vis each other. It's not a subject where it's off limits. You talk about it and you put it front and center.
Now, in South Africa, we call him the Arch. So, Arch, what about you?
Yeah. Well, I would like, first of all, to follow the lead of my dear friend and congratulate the Ford Foundation very warmly on its 75th anniversary. And also to say that you played a very significant role in our quest for freedom. And so on behalf of millions of my compatriots, thank you very, very much for having supported the anti-apartheid struggle in the fashion that you did. I want to say, I mean, that our world is a world that has become better in many ways. I thought in a way that a very few years ago, Madeline and I, appearing as we would be appearing now, would have been a very significant example of tokenism. That the token black, the token female, and I mean even more so, one with a Jewish background. So it's quite fantastic actually, and maybe when we are caught up in all of the many serious problems there are in our world, we forget, I mean, that this world has got better in regard to sexism, you know. And of course, I mean, you were wonderfully a pioneer as the first woman Secretary of State. But that sexism, racism, anti-Semitism are very, very significant advances that the world has made. And you know what? I want to take off my hat to all of you who have been for so long passionate in your commitment to advancing the cause of human rights. Because sometimes I think we either become too blasé or disheartened by the things that we see. And we don't note, I mean, that there has been movement. I mean, a few years ago, if you talked about gender, but if you talked about sexual orientation, you got all kinds of peas and, I mean, just horrendous. But now, I mean, you can actually, and you can if you ask me, what do I really feel? It's that 1994 happened for us. We became free. That's fantastic. You know, I mean, that is a fantastic achievement. Let me shut up.
No, never.
But let me ask, you mentioned 1994, obviously the liberation of South Africa when it became, had its first non-racial democracy. Are there lessons, because we've been talking today about reimagining human rights for the future. What lessons do you see in the things that have encouraged both of you in the past that could be applicable in countries that are now struggling in a new incarnation, in a new democratic, we hope, incarnation? What are the lessons from things that have encouraged you and made you feel optimistic? What can be shared in those countries, the countries of the Arab Spring, the countries that have yet to quite grasp democratic principles and principles of human rights?
Well, I think one of the discussions that has gone on among academics as well as practitioners are divisions between political rights and economic rights. And, you know, people that talked about economic rights were accused of being socialist, communists. And all of a sudden, I think what is evident is that they go together. There have been endless discussions about, do you have to have political development first or economic development first? I'm chairman of the board of an organization called the National Democratic Institute that works a lot on supporting democracy, not imposing it, which is an oxymoron, but basically to look at political structures. But what we're learning is that people want to vote and eat. And so the bottom line is trying to figure out how the economic and political development go together. And so this is exactly what we're seeing in the Arab awakening. A lot of the people, the way it began was this young man in Tunisia immolating himself, and it was because he was poor. What I understand happened is his father died, his mother could not inherit the land because she was a woman, and he then is poor. He goes and sets up a little stand in the middle of town, and he is disrespected. There's the question of dignity. And so I think we're learning that, first of all, democracy is a complicated process. We have a bit to learn ourselves recently. And I think that...
You could be more specific about that in a few minutes.
Yes, well, I can. But basically that it's not an event, it's a process. And it's complicated, and I think Arch and I were talking about this, is how this evolves in different countries. You think you're free, you've arrived, and yet it's just the beginning of the story.
But I heard something earlier this afternoon about countries that aren't necessarily democratic. For example, China. I was in Singapore. I've never seen cleaner streets, more beautiful housing projects for the poor. Everybody's working. So is human rights and democracy necessarily the ingredients? Or can you have it in an authoritarian society like China, like Singapore, like Lee Kuan Yew's China?
I happen to believe that you do need democracy, and I don't like the idea when people say X people are not ready for democracy. I actually think nobody's ready for anything else. And
why do you think that?
Because I think that we're all the same and we want to be able to make choices about our lives. I mean, you begin by deciding where you're going to live or where you send your children to school or what language you speak or what religion you want to practice. And ultimately, a democracy is the only way to get that expression. And so that's my personal belief. I think that people want to be able to make decisions on their own. And while it's not a simple process, it's a very difficult process in many ways and requires a citizenship that participates. I really do believe ultimately it's the only form of government that's satisfying for human rights.
The only form of government that's satisfying for human rights? Arch?
Can I come in?
Anywhere you want to come in.
Yeah. Of course. Thank you. As I have grown older, and you are aware, I mean, I am less young. It is extraordinary how it has come to be true that we learn from history that we don't learn from history. I mean, you would have thought that people who have gone through a particular process, one of the things they would not do would be to replicate the things, for instance, against which they struggled, the things that they opposed. And related to this is the fact that it's a great deal easier to fight against. You know, I mean, you're all really united because you've got a common enemy. Just you wait until you've got that freedom. And yeah, I mean, one, it is not easy to tell people, now what are you struggling for? Against was easy. This is all autobiographical. One is that we really were fantastic in our opposition to apartheid, united and basically united. And we had this one goal. We achieved that goal. Sure. Now you've got many, many objectives vying for as to supremacy. But even more horrendously distressing is how you replicate the things that you thought you really opposed with every fiber of your being. It's incredible. And I think, I mean, that we've not taken seriously the psychology of a human being. I don't want to point to anywhere, but yeah, I think, I mean, that for many of us, there is a deep sadness at where we are. Now, we've
Where?
got to...
Here or there or where? In America, in the world?
No. I'm talking about me, us. South Africa.
Okay.
Because it is a wonderful example of a people who have striven against injustice and oppression, and we do have one of the best constitutions in the world. You know, I mean, it outlaws homophobia, the death penalty. It's fantastic. But it has to be implemented by human beings. And we really have got to take seriously human beings. Hey, you'd have thought, I mean, that the last thing we would have would be, I would say, corruption, you know, or appointing people to positions not because of ability, but because of affiliation, political affiliation. Now, we went through that in the apartheid years, and yeah, you want to weep. And as an old man, you sit around and you say, no, this can't be us. You know.
But we've just heard the Secretary say that democracy is the best form of government, where it's the only one that guarantees that people can speak. So what's going wrong in South Africa? And what are the lessons as we try to reimagine what can be done in situations where people are veering off the track and not learning from history?
No, I mean, the wonderful thing is that, say, for instance, we've just been having a campaign because there was a proposed law that actually does, it's called the secrecy law, prohibition of whatever.
Freedom of expression.
And wonderfully, yeah. I mean, I think very many people have said, no, this is not where we are going. No, man, this is not what we struggled for. And very many people are saying, yeah, we fought for freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and so on. And you would have thought, you know, those would be such obvious things, you didn't have to be speaking about them.
But there is a debate, a lively debate about it, and the law
Yeah, yeah.
hasn't been passed.
Yeah, that is.
So maybe that's...
No. Very interestingly, they had said, having listened to all the debates, they made some minute little adjustments, and then had said that this week, I think today, it was going to be voted on. And they have a massive majority. And that is part of the problem about democracy. You know, you worry. I mean, yes, I think democracy is the best possible in the circumstances that we have. And so people have been able to say, no, our Constitution says, you know, and people have been campaigning. But, you know, you say, is this us? I mean, that we should be even discussing this. This seems so obvious. I mean, we were struggling against a repressive government that didn't want people to discuss freely. It teaches you a heck of a lot about humility.
Madam Secretary, how do you see that? Not so much in the
You're
South
going to call him Arch. You have to call me Madeline.
Madam Madeline.
Maddie.
Madam Madeline. In the larger context beyond South Africa, I mean, what are the cautions that you've learned, not only in America, but just in the world, that organizations like those here concerned with human rights, what are the kind of cautions that keep people from not learning from history? What can we learn going forward to prevent the kind of thing that might, I don't think it's going to happen, but let's hope it doesn't. But if it does, I mean, you've got a majority, and they've spoken, and right now the African National Congress runs the country, and they are in the majority, and the president says they're going to rule till Jesus comes. So what do you do in those societies where there are such challenges?
Well, first of all, I didn't say that democracy was simple. I mean, I think it is a very complicated process. When we started the National Democratic Institute, we actually sat around and talked about what are the elements of democracy. And everybody would say elections. Elections are clearly necessary but not sufficient. So one of the other things that I think is essential is a functioning opposition party, because that provides accountability and gives a chance to choose and throw the people out. But it has to be a fair, an opposition that actually is part of the system. Then obviously the rule of law. You were talking about the problem of corruption, a free press. I mean, there are various elements that are part of the system that have to exist. I also think providing a sustainable life for people so that they can have economic justice and you don't have what has happened in more and more countries, a greater divide between the rich and the poor. I think by numbers there are fewer poor people in the world, but the divide is growing bigger. So these are very large elements. You were talking about China. I think that clearly there have been great advances in terms of their economy. They have taken the equivalent of an American population out of poverty, but there still are an awful lot of poor people. Also, you do not have a free expression. They are picking people up for disagreeing. And in Singapore, there are all kinds of stories about being caned if you chew gum, or various stories. So I would prefer to live in any democracy, even a flawed one, than to live in a place where I can't express my views. And so I think there's a lot to do. What I find interesting about what's going on these days, and go back to human rights, I am not the one that would make this argument, but one could have made the argument that people didn't know what was going on during the Holocaust. We now know what is going on everywhere in terms of their human rights records. So the thing that makes it more complicated is, do we then have an obligation to do something about it? And that is this concept of responsibility to protect. which
Yeah,
then bumps up against a whole other doctrine, which is the right of sovereignty.
We'll talk a little bit about that, the responsibility to protect.
Well, I find it, I've been involved in doing some work on this. I first did for the U.S. Institute of Peace, a task force with former Secretary of Defense Bill Cohen on prevention of genocide, is trying to figure out what are the trigger points when, in fact, not just any human rights, but the right to life is taken away simply because of who you are. So there's a follow-on now, which is this whole concept on responsibility to protect, which is you were talking about Darfur, that you know what's going on there. As an international community, do we have some responsibility when we see other people being ethnically cleansed or genocidally killed to go in and do something about it? The problem is if you have a leader who then says, no way, not in my country, you can't come in, then how do you do these different issues? One of the things on Libya that happened was the Security Council resolution is based on the idea that Gaddafi said that his people were cockroaches, that he was going to kill them all, and therefore then the international community goes in. But it's a very complicated concept. One, because of sovereignty, and then who enforces it. So it goes back to the issue of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Does it apply to all of us, and do we all have some responsibility to help each other? Pretty tough, but it is the big question of the 21st century. And one of the issues, Charlene, you as a press person, I think one of the issues here is what is the responsibility of the media?
I have that question down here.
Well, I can tell you. No,
I was saving it for last.
No, but I'll tell you, when I was ambassador at the UN, we used to say that CNN or PBS or whatever was the 16th member of the Security Council. If you all were interested in something, it came to our attention. More people died in Congo than died in Somalia, frankly, but it wasn't the issue that came up. And so it's how do you bring the horrors of the world to the attention so that the international community deals with it. And a lot, I end up usually blaming the press, but the bottom line is,
don't they all?
You know, how does that all work together? I put an awful lot on the table, I'm sorry. So.
No, that's all right. Let me see if I can deconstruct some of that. You have any comment on that?
I was going to say, I mean, Mary is spot on. I mean, I'm sitting there with half my mouth open. I mean, like I'm at a seminar, and I'm a graduate student, and sort of listening. But I think one of the things that we've got to take seriously is human nature. But even more than this, I think that most of you don't give yourselves enough credit. You are a great deal more powerful than you actually believe. And you have accomplished or helped to accomplish an incredible amount. I mean, helping to change the tone, the mood. I mean, when I said I take off my hat to you, it wasn't just to butter you up. It is to say, don't underestimate what you can help to accomplish. You have made, on the whole, the world look at things differently. I mean, it is because of the passion of people like yourselves that we've had a convention on the rights of the child. You know, and when one spoke about gender equality and sexism, those things didn't just happen. It was because there were people who said, these are important issues and we are going to campaign like nobody's business. And when they become, as you say, more or less ordinary fare, it's not because it's dropped down from heaven. It's that you and you and you and you and you really took trouble. And sometimes it was putting your lives on the line on behalf of people you had never met. Now, let me tell you why you have done that. It's because, in fact, you are all Africans. I mean, that is what anthropology and these guys are saying. You come from there. But let me tell you what it is that I'm wearing a thing here that says Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the essence of being human. The highest praise I can give you as an African is to say, you, Ubuntu. This person has got Ubuntu. This is a person who is warm. This is someone who is generous. This is someone who shares. Because we say, what is so obvious? A person is a person only through other persons. As you know, I have a hotline to this other place. And one of the lessons God has been trying to teach us, and God would get a horrible grade if we were to grade God. But the one lesson God actually is hoping we will learn one day is that we belong in one family. Not as a figure of speech, but for real.
So let me ask. Now that we have God on the table, let me turn to the goddess to my right.
I don't mind being put in my place like that. I mean,
no, but I saw Ubuntu and I'm saying, how long is it to Ubuntu? Because I use it all the time, and sometimes I credit you, and sometimes I don't.
I used to love you.
But I want to ask the goddess to my right, is the Ford Foundation then wrong to even posit the notion of reimagining human rights in a time of change? I mean, that's the theme of this program. So I hope you say that they're not, and tell me why they're not wrong. Yeah. But I mean, it sounds so much like the work that everybody here has been doing. It's been effective to a certain extent. So do you reimagine it at this point in time when we just had the panel on social media and so forth? Is it something we need to do at this point?
First of all, I think it goes back to some basic things we've been saying, is that human nature we are all part of the same family, certain basic values. I do think the 21st century, however, is a very different kind of a place for any number of reasons, partially because of the information revolution and possibilities of travel everywhere, and the integration in many ways of the different parts of the world. I think we're in a very unsettled time. I have used this analogy as that during the Cold War, international relations were like two ships in the Panama Canal, not a lot of room on either side of those concrete locks. Then after the end of the Cold War, it was like ships in the English Channel, more water but still land on both sides. We're now in the middle of the ocean. There are more ships. We don't know what the charts are. There's not a lot of faith in various institutions. And so what we have to look to are institutions like the Ford Foundation or public-private partnerships to begin to look at different ways to solve the problems. So I think the basic value on human rights is the same. But I think we have to look to different institutions to do the work and different partners, but go back to the idea that we are all the same. That is where I come from. But I was going to ask Arch a question. I've had a lot of trouble about this. There's you, who is a basically kind and good and humanitarian person.
Most of the time.
Well, but with a sense of humor. What did he do to you?
He says he doesn't love me
I appeal to the jury.
But what I don't understand, and just to pick one of the really bad people of the moment, Gaddafi.
Yeah.
What makes somebody with the same plumbing and the same way that we're all set up be so evil, and then to have people that are so good, and some of us are in between? But the bottom line is that's where I have trouble. I really do.
But then, I mean, wouldn't you have had trouble saying, how come you can have a Dietrich Bonhoeffer and an Adolf Hitler? You know.
Why did God let that happen?
Talking for God. No, seriously.
No,
to
me, it's the big question.
Let me tell you, the God that I worship is quite incredible, really. This is a God who has all the power in the world, but who has said, I gave you a gift. I gave you a gift of freedom. And you know what? It's for real. And when you make a choice, I am not going to subvert that gift if I notice you are going to make a wrong choice. And so you have a God who is omnipotent, who becomes impotent. God was sitting, watching as one set of God's children was killing 6 million people. Now, I am a parent, and I say, you know, I understand how God must feel when I see one of my children going to make an absolute boob, and they are going to choose, and you know the choice is a disaster, but it's a choice he or she makes. And I sit there, and Leah sits there, and we weep. And God weeps. God weeps, waiting. It's an incredible, actually, I mean, far from diminishing God, it actually, this is a God who has this incredible belief in my integrity as a person. And so, yeah, that happens. But then there will be those who choose freely to say, we're going to stand up against this.
Well, this is where the Ford Foundation comes in. I mean, I'm serious in terms of this. Let's lay this out. So Gaddafi has done made bad choices for his people.
Yeah.
Now they have made a series of choices, and the question is, how do various parts of the international community feel any sense of responsibility for the people that had to live under this system for 42 years? So there's the combination of NATO or the United States or the French, and then there's a foundation like the Ford Foundation that can in fact go and help educate some of the people about what they should be thinking about, bringing people-to-people exchanges, projects in the cities, so where it supplements God. Maybe that's the way to put it.
I think we need to change the subject at this point. On behalf of maybe a few atheists in the audience, let me, because we're not going to have a whole lot more time, but there are a couple of things I want to get to.
You didn't want me to talk theology.
Well,
No. All right.
you know,
that's fine.
I happen to
I don't
know you,
mind.
Arch, and any question I ask you, you're going to answer it the way you want to. So let me ask you this question, because I know
Yes.
that in addition to God and Leah,
Yes.
you have another passion, and that's child marriage. Tell us why you've embraced that. And is this a part of the elders deal, or just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'll try and do this very, very. I will try and do this. I want to say briefly, and I can't get in
Get
my
the word out.
No, look, I actually didn't know the extent of this problem. I used to think that no, I mean, this is something that's a problem maybe in India. And then we had a fantastic workshop with, again, some of these wonderful NGOs and so on, who then said, here is an issue. And it turned out that it is a massive problem, because here you have young, well, if you say young women, they are not women yet. When we went to Ethiopia, the average age of the young wives we met, 12. And you think emotionally, this child is not ready to be a mother. Physically. Yeah, you see, it can't be true that this is happening. And then we got to be fed with statistics that 10 million such people, young people, are going to undergo this horrendous system a year.
All over the world.
Yeah. And you know what? The highest incidence in a country for the world is, in fact, in Africa. 75% is something that happens in Niger. Yeah, you have very, very many young child brides in India. And it was pointed out to us that, you know, at this rate, 6 of the 8 MDGs,
Millennium Development Goals.
we can wave goodbye to. Poverty and hunger eradication, you've lost even before you've started. Universal primary education, these young people, the first thing that happens is they drop out of school because they've got to go and be mothers, housewives, and maternal health, mortality, you're playing marbles. Because again, it's been shown, girls under 15 who gave birth are 5 times as likely to die giving birth than young women at 19 and over. Gender equality. Bye-bye.
So you've painted a horrendous picture.
Yeah.
What do you propose to do about it?
Well,
Or that anybody can do about it?
With Ford, Ford Foundation, Nova Foundation, Nike, and others have inaugurated a global partnership, and the title is Girls, Not Brides, a partnership to end this horrendous custom. And will you let me? Just tiny. We went to Ethiopia, where the communities have begun to work against this. We met with several young child brides, 12 and over. And there's this one who says, you know, my husband never addressed me by my name. My husband expected that I was going to clean the house, clean the kids, prepare the food, go to the fields, return. You'd be sitting there. I have to start the evening meal, and he sometimes wanted me to wash his feet in addition. And now this thing has begun to help them change. And you could see how she was glowing. She says, he calls me by my name. And he fetches water. He helps with the kids. We share chores. And now we discuss together. I mean, you say, if nothing else happened and we just had this one child, it made it all so worthwhile. And I have said, I am going to be involved in this campaign with the same passion, commitment, and dedication that I hope I had when we fought against apartheid.
Well, I'm sure you will. That's amazing.
Yeah.
We're going to conclude having you speak briefly about your passion. And what I'd like you to do, since I got the heave-ho sign over here, is as you talk about your passion as the last part of this panel, or this wonderful discussion, tell us how we reimagine. These ones have done wonderful work, but how we reimagine the next generation of human rights activists as you talk about your own passion. I've given you a double assignment here.
Well, my passion, as I've made clear, is democracy. And a lot of it, we all come with our own baggage. I was born in Czechoslovakia before the war and saw the country that I was born in be sold out of democracy by the West in order to appease Hitler. And then there was the issue of, that was one totalitarian government, and then it was, quote, liberated by the Soviet Union, another totalitarian system. So for me, the passion really is democracy. The question is how we reimagine it in the 21st century, because I think that it, as I said, it is much more complicated. It requires something that is very difficult, and difficult, we were talking a little earlier about what's going on in this country. We have to be able to stand up for what we believe in, our basic rights and our values, and at the same time be able to find common ground with people that we disagree with. That is a very tough concept, I think. So how do you compromise with people that you think are completely wrong? And how do you find that common ground? And I do think that that is how we have to respect each other in a way that we understand, and that is a human rights issue. How do we deal with the fact that there are people that do not have even an iota of what we have, so the poverty issues? How do we understand that having a healthy planet is a human right? That we have the right to water. I don't think we saw having the right to water as a human right. So I think the whole concept of human rights is expanded, and trying to figure out how to operate in a world with more and more people, of a group of young people. And I think that what has to happen is that the human rights community has to work more and more directly with people in different countries, so that it's hard to figure out what institutions to use, because at the moment I don't think there's a lot of faith in institutions, but really have the sense that we have to look at the base, stand up for our basic values, and at the same time being able to respect others and find common ground. That is very difficult.
As we have seen
As
in
we
America.
have seen. And so I think the question is, what is the, for me, education is very much a part of it. Having an informed citizenry. There is, if you're going to be interested in human rights, you have a responsibility to learn, to study, to understand what it means in different countries and how we operate. And so I don't have a problem in reimagining or reinventing or reconfiguring, because it's such a basic aspect of humanity. And I do think that we entered, you know, it's interesting. I was the last Secretary of State of the 20th century and the first of the 21st. The only problem was that I said it to President Clinton about 3 months after he named me, which was really presumptuous, because it made it seem as if he'd keep me the whole time. Well, he did, and so I am. But the bottom line is that we began to look at what the institutions were of the 20th century. And President Clinton began to talk about building bridges to the 21st century. He said it so often that we always knew that the speech was about to come up that way. But the bottom line is that is what has to happen. This is a very complicated century. And who thought that 10 years, you know, 1 year into it, we would have such a sign of evil that happened. But the bottom line is that that is the reinvention of how to deal with all the technology that has come into our lives, all the information, all the people, and the youth. You talk about the child brides, but they're just, the youth bulge is what we have to deal with and figure out how to get them much more involved in our lives. So an awful lot of an agenda, and I think that the Ford Foundation is in a spectacular position to do some good.
Thank you
I'm
very
delighted
much.
to have been asked to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
just want to say thank you to you.
He wants to tell you that he really loves me.
Thank you, great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.